in our single-family business. I have the absolute privilege to introduce our next panel. Carol actually set this up really nicely, and actually I have a bunch of stats here that sort of also talk to how depressing the housing crisis is right now. I'm not going to really say them all because I think we're all here because we kind of understand the fact that we just don't have enough doors in this country, which is driving rental prices up, which means people can't save for a down payment. Home ownership is going up, which means people aren't owning homes, building wealth. And so we see a cycle of intergenerational poverty that just has to stop. And so, as you can imagine, I spend a lot of my time talking at events like this, talking with people about it. And sometimes I just want to roll up my sleeves and pick up a hammer and go build a damn house, right? So it's kind of a frustrating problem. And I really, I think building is really the way we're going to solve this. And so as Carol said, innovation, building technology is a really important part of how we solve this problem. And so we have a great panel today that is actually rolling up their sleeves and building homes. So I have Rick Holliday here, CEO with Factory OS. They build modular multifamily buildings. Sam Rubin, who's the Vice President of Compliance and Sustainability with Mighty Buildings. They do 3D printed homes, something that I find really fascinating. Steve Glenn is here. He's from Plant Prefab. He's the CEO. They do, as you can imagine, prefabricated homes. And the panel will be moderated by Corey Weinberg. He's a reporter with a tech industry news site called The Information. So join me in welcoming our panel.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. I'm Corey Weinberg. I'm with The Information. To my immediate left, we have Sam. In the middle, we have Rick. And on the end, we have Steve. So construction technology, it's obviously, Carol said it's her favorite topic. So this is the one to pay attention to this morning, I think. It's a complex area with a lot of different companies kind of trying to bend the cost curve in different ways. And so what I'd love to just first do is have each of the panelists introduce their companies and sort of how they're measuring their progress to date so far. Maybe just sort of a 1-minute sort of explanation of sort of how you're tackling this problem, starting with Sam.
Sure. As mentioned, my name's Sam Rubin, and I oversee compliance and sustainability for Mighty Buildings. We're a stealth startup here in the Bay Area that is developing technology to 3D print buildings. So we're developing a proprietary material that will allow us to print the entirety of the building itself. And so what we're really looking to do is leverage new technology in order to really bring down the cost of homes, particularly for the younger generations that have been so hard hit by the 2008 financial crisis. I think numbers are millennials are something like 30% behind their parents' generation when it comes to wealth accumulation. And so we're really excited about how do we bring this new technology to bear in ways that can really help bring those costs down, as well as speeding up the time that it takes to build a home in order to get more houses onto the market quickly, particularly in areas like here in San Francisco, LA, and others that are really suffering from the affordable housing crisis.
Just following up on that quickly, are you able to say sort of how quickly you're going to be able to build these homes?
The goal is to be able to create the entire unit within a week or two.
A week or two?
Yeah, within our, so from order to full delivery from our side of things, about a month.
And you're pretty early stage, you're pretty stealth.
Yeah, we're still working on the technology, still in stealth mode, but we're really excited with the direction and how things are coming along.
And you're venture backed, you were in Y Combinator?
Yeah, we were in the 2018 Y Combinator winter cohort.
Great, awesome. Rick, all right.
Well, Factory OS is something that a lot of people are familiar with, but it's very different. It's a company that builds the better part of a multifamily home offsite, fully formed rooms that are put together much like Legos. And with the advent of some of the partnerships we have with Autodesk, and ironically, we have a partnership with Google with our customer. They came to us and said, we'd like you to start a factory. And I thought that was a hilarious and rather stupid thing for them to suggest. And I said to John Igo, who's the person who put me out to it, that if you put the money up, I'll do it. And he says, no, we're not going to do that. He goes, we'll make the first order from you. So they ordered 300 homes from me when I didn't have a business card, a building, or anything. That was about 2.5 years ago. But no, it was only a year and a half ago, excuse me. So we started our production line about April 1st. We've already finished our first project, and we'll be finishing our second. They're about 110 unit projects. Both of them will be going to Oakland as start. And probably the most sort of interesting thing for me In addition to the fact we're building housing in half the time at about half the cost of site building. We believe it's better quality with some of the uses of technology. And when I was seeing the labor statistics, it sort of tickled the part of the company that really has surprised me the most. We have a partnership with the Carpenters Union. We're taking underpaid workers and converting them into housing manufacturing workers with the Carpenters Union, training them. And if somebody goes out to my factory, you'll see a young woman that had been waiting tables for 15 years. 4 months ago, she came to work with us. She doubled her income in a day, and she's pulling wire today and wiring a unit that will go into West Oakland with a great amount of enthusiasm. So we're building a different job class with the unions as a partner. We're building housing less expensively and faster.
Right. We'll get into the labor stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sam, you're doing, Mighty Buildings is doing 3D printing of homes. Rick, you're doing off-site modular construction. Steve, how does Planned Prefab fit into this mix?
So we're focused, I'll actually start with the market we're targeting. So it turns out that the world's becoming more urbanized, which is great for those of us who believe that the only responsible way we'll deal with increasing and increasingly bad climate change meets increasing population is to put people closer to jobs, services, transportation. The more visible parts, you can see it south of Market, downtown LA where I live, or Hollywood, Manhattan, or the larger multifamily project like that Rick's working on. But actually, in California at least, by growth rate, single-family teardowns are growing far, far faster than large multifamily. And the fastest growing segment in new home construction, again in California, are small multifamily, less than 20 units. If you're doing larger projects, you're related or Forest City, you work with professional general contractors and they do things pretty responsibly. If you're doing a single-family home project or a small multifamily, your only option are mom-and-pop general contractors. And there's some great ones, and there are many who are not so great. We're focused on making that market more efficient. It's a custom market, thankfully an increasingly sustainable market. And so we have a system that involves both a patented building system as well as a set of client-facing online services to dramatically ease the design process. So you can work with homes that we've pre-designed and we can customize for different lots, floor plans, or you can bring your own architect. That's what we do.
Great. So I think one question I always try to ask companies that are in sort of a field that is sort of having a moment or is up and coming is why now? Why are we seeing so much activity around this space? And I think everyone in this room is well aware, better aware than I am, of sort of the macro picture and sort of the broader housing affordability crisis. But help us understand where you guys are seeing real technology change that is driving innovation in the sector. You know, how is robotics or automation or software and building design software advancing in a way that allows you all to actually be able to scale right now?
Well, I should start by saying I'm not aware of that being used in any large to any significant degree in the United States, as it is, for example, in Japan. Japan, the largest home builders, Sekisui, for example, Toyota has a home unit. They use fully automated factories. Japan, like Scandinavia, like Germany, and other European countries, do a much higher percentage of their housing prefabricated because they've always had really high housing costs, construction costs, labor costs, land costs. We're now getting there. You heard about that earlier. But the main advantages that those of us doing at least modular construction, Rick does this, we do this, we're not leveraging any great technology innovation. We're leveraging the fact that by building off-site in a controlled facility, oftentimes with labor that tends to be less than what you can do, at least in big cities, certainly parallel construction, certainly predictable construction, big word for developers, we're able to give people a more predictable development project. Always faster, almost always faster, and oftentimes, and certainly up here, lower cost. So to be clear, that's what's happening. That in the US for decades, and still the majority of prefabricators, again, certainly in the modular space. We're focused on standard, lower cost, non-sustainable housing. And the change is that because of all of the perfect storm of events, including costs and diminishment of construction labor that you heard earlier, there are now a new group of folks like us, like Factory OS, Katerra, who are focused now on the urban, on the higher quality, on the higher cost market. That's new. Now, there are a number of technology innovations that people are bringing. Mighty Bounding, I don't know a lot about, but certainly that sounds like they're doing some cool stuff. We've got some cool stuff in development. We just did a big financing with Amazon to help fund that. That hopefully will have a big impact. But I'm not aware of anybody doing that in the U.S. right now.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the interesting things about this market is it seems so sort of small and niche in terms of how many units are actually out in the wild that are built off-site, beyond sort of besides like typical mobile homes. And yet you see other countries that have been doing this forever. You've had even in U.S. history, the Sears model homes that have, sort of been built this way. Sam, what are you guys sort of trying to take on? You have an R&D lab. What are you guys cooking up in there?
Well, we're addressing the fact that if you took a home builder from a 1900 build site, dropped them on a site today, they would pretty much know what to do. We haven't really taken advantage of the amazing technology that we've come up with in the last century to really change how we make houses. So what we're doing is we're beginning to address that by bringing some of the incredible 3D printing technology, various material science technology that are coming to the forefront, applying that in order to make the process faster, more sustainable, less waste, and really do it in a way that's going to bring more houses to market quickly.
And how do you do that exactly?
We're in stealth mode, so I can't go into too much detail on it. But we've developed a proprietary polymer that allows us to print curves, angles, roofs, so we don't face some of the many limitations you see with some of the concrete 3D printing, which is coming online, which is really exciting as well, combining 3D printing with more traditional materials.
Right. What's the key to get? I feel like I've seen 3D printed homes in like Dwell or something. Like,
there's been some like Apis-Core and Icon. So we're really looking at combining a lot of actually great stuff that Steve and Rick have been pioneering in the prefab world in this generation of it, really taking that concept, combining it with these new materials and this new science, and really bring it together to kind of take that next leap and to be able to do it with smaller factories. Because what we've seen is that throughout history, I mean, as you mentioned, Sears had prefab homes way back middle of last century earlier. Unfortunately, every time prefab gets big, cycle hits.
Right.
And because of the large factories that you're dealing with, you end up with a situation where you've got this massive capex that you're just sitting on empty and it's idle. So you have to figure out what you're doing with that, and oftentimes it means you go out of business or you transition. So what we're looking at doing is what does it mean to bring a couple print lines, smaller building, 20,000 square feet, apply that to an area, say Santa Rosa or Redding, where you've had massive wildfires, destruction of complete housing stocks in areas where there's already an affordable housing crisis. So what's it mean to set up a small factory there, just churn out units for a year or two until you hit that demand, and then you scale it back down or move to somewhere else where there's a demand spike?
Just sorry to stick with you, Sam, for a minute. How are you expecting people to finance these, or like sort of what's the finance aspect of this? Do you have that figured out yet?
We're working on that actively. We're actually looking at working with local credit unions and others to see what does it look like to combine, because one of the market, we're initially addressing the accessory dwelling unit market.
Right.
Just because of the great changes in the regulatory structure around that. But what's it look like to do a tear down and rebuild where you also add an ADU, leverage that ADU income rental income to help bring down the cost of that mortgage up front.
Okay.
So we're really excited about some of the innovative ideas, and that's why we're really excited to be here today, to hear some of the great ideas that are coming in the pipeline.
So Rick, with Factory OS, all right, so you've given us some hints of sort of your progress so far in terms of having a relationship with a labor union. You have a big, new, sexy customer in Google. You have a factory that's set up. What are your like one or two key challenges that you're focused on for the next 6 months to really get Factory OS churning out a lot of units? And what metric are you kind of looking at to ensure that you'll be successful?
The most significant is the the stuff, marrying the A&E to the factory floor. This is an industry that, it was the mobile home industry found us as developers. For those of you who don't know, I've been a developer. That's how I found this business. And I was a customer of 3 different modular jobs from 2 different companies, one that went broke. So I know it through the customer lens. What the customer needs, in my opinion, is the ability to take a program like Revit that maybe many of you understand, that you sit down with a site and your architect and you start to sort of form your building to see if it's politically palatable. And then you basically sell your building. And while you're selling your building, you're trying to, in real time, continue the design process and price it, which is very difficult and challenging. What we intend to do, and we're working on now with Autodesk, with Revit, Structsoft, Manufacton, and Sage, which is an accounting program, we're marrying programs, and we will have an operating system for the factory that will allow you to do the following. You come in, we go on Google Earth, and we look at your site. So you say, Corey, I've got a site in St. Helena, right. So we look at it, we can sort of see, are there any real showstoppers for modular in terms of, can you crane things? Is it possible?
What makes a showstopper for modular?
Yeah, it may be a site that's steep. I mean, that's kind of simple. If it's Malibu, you say, sorry, Bruce Jenner, I won't build your house, okay? But no, generally you go into that. You take the Google Earth, and then you marry it with Revit, and you sit down and you have a Q&A with the developer or customer. We had a college come in the other day that's in Vallejo. That's the Maritime Academy. They got a vacant piece of land. They need, 100 one-bedrooms. They need a certain kind of studio and some 2-bedrooms. So we will take a standardized unit, model it in Revit, model it up to the building, then the Manufacton, Structsoft, Sage, and all these other programs will be able to digitize those drawings and do a material takeoff for the whole job within hours or less. Then we have a buying program with Georgia Pacific and other big suppliers that want to help, where we'll have real-time data every day on what a 2x4 costs. So we will be able to give a material takeoff, a material cost, and then as our labor metrics improve when we built it, we put a labor matrix on it, put the overhead, I could tell you, hey, that site you want, this is what it would cost you if you put it on the line in 6 months. And as a developer, if somebody really did that and saved me money, I'd be a happy customer. We will have that in 6 to 9 months.
Right. Has that been harder than you imagined when you started the factory?
Not really. No, but you know what? I'm not in the room today. There's about 6 engineers out at our factory today. And maybe it's harder than I think. But,
don't tell you.
But the reality is the factory is a 250,000 square foot laboratory that we wanted to get it operating, get blood in the veins, and then get the programmers in with our architects and engineers to start building the software. So the OS in Factory OS is real. We'll have an operating system. The OS is offsite, of course.
I imagine, both for you and Steve, I imagine there's still some skepticism from developer partners. Which kind of developers are you seeing trying to dive in first, and how do you try to widen the market for the kinds of developers that would actually be interested in working with you guys?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Either you or Rick. Yeah.
Go ahead.
We literally did our first marketing program at Plant Prefab ever, which was last weekend. We introduced a line of homes, accessory dwelling units from Eve Bahar, who's based here at a conference. So there's lots of press about prefab. Developers are very aware of the cost pressures they're facing, of the difficulties they're having finding subs to do the work, of the fact that many of their subs historically have not been super reliable. So they are looking for alternatives, and to the degree that there are folks like us and Factory OS and others who are offering a solution that offers the promise to be more reliable and more cost effective, more time effective, like it's sort of selling itself. We've shipped 26 units in the last 2.5 years. We were started 2.5 years ago. So we've got a track record. We've got great references. People can come to the factory, see the quality of the work we do. So frankly, we're doing well on the business development standpoint, and I'm not at all naive about the fact that it's a good market now, and there will be another downturn. So I don't assume it's just going to be like this forever. We've got to earn our business.
And when you say the business development is good, demand is not, your challenge. Is that
Right.
essentially what you're saying?
Right.
Okay. What about? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Our big challenge right now is scaling up. Frankly, that's one of the reasons why we did a financing.
Right. And is that a manufacturing sort of challenge primarily of getting to scale?
Any system that scales has inherent challenges, whether it's software or hardware. In our domain, challenges include finding people, number one, that have the skills you need. Plumbers right now are like, I used to be a tech guy, so I hate that I can't, like finding a rail programmer. I think that's a hard thing to do for my software development friends. Rails, finding great plumbers is really hard right now. So people, facilities, stuff like that. Yeah. Putting in processes and procedures to deal with a lot more projects. This is not easy stuff.
Would it be, and Rick, I'm curious your opinion too, is that it's kind of ironic that the sort of off-site people also have like the same labor challenges, I guess, that on-site builders would have, but is there, where should you be, I guess, building your factories to best meet that, to best sort of get enough labor for your own factory, high quality labor, and also be able to have a close enough market that's nearby that you'll be able to ship your modules to. What
Mare
goes into
Island
factory
and Vallejo's
location?
really looking good.
What is?
Mare Island and Vallejo. No, I mean,
Yeah.
but what we learned, it was something we stumbled into. I thought I was going to do the factory in West Oakland. Some people know that. Google's interest and my interest was born in two things. We had to get housing less expensive, and we had to see if we could build a new labor force. Laura Cusito is here, I think. I'm sorry. But she wrote a piece just about 2 months ago that our labor force shrunk 30% in the last 8 years. And it hasn't regrown. Millennials aren't going into this, and boomers are retiring, and immigrants are getting squeezed. So this is a problem that caught the industry flat-footed, which is really what she said in her story. The unions, thankfully, when we made our deal with them 18 months ago, said, no, we got the hard work of, we got to go find the person, train the person, and create housing assemblers. Now, who will do that and get a $50,000 to $60,000 a year job? Someone making $12, $14 an hour at Starbucks, okay? Nothing against Starbucks, okay? And guess what? That's the part of the workforce. We got 3.9% unemployment, but that's the good news. The bad news, half the people don't have enough income to make ends meet. So the unions have organizers that go in, and they found this young woman who was a waitress and brought her into their training program. So we've got to find the workers, train the workers. They're motivated because they're getting more money, and empower them, and then they're industrialized construction workers. But that's how bad it is. We have to build the workforce and the confidence in what they're building.
Well, there's been some talk in San Francisco of building a modular factory here. Obviously, there's also been conversations about, well, okay, is the factory going to be staffed by sort of all of the different skilled trade unions that exist, not just sort of the broader carpenter unions, and you get into that politics. Are you seeing any headway on a modular factory in San Francisco?
I know there's interest in it, and I really don't want to be dismissive. It's because a lot of it's sincere. The best answer I've got is the carpenters who agreed to be my partner. We were in a conversation about this, and the carpenters of the 700-pound gorilla, and Bobby Alvarado goes, Rick, middle-class people wouldn't be driving cars if we had a windshield wiper installers union. I thought, interesting. He goes, we have a united auto workers union. We need a united housing workers force. And that was the genesis of the workforce he's building for me.
I want to remind everybody we've about 19 minutes left in the panel, and in about 5 minutes, I think we can start taking questions. So make sure to submit your questions at that URL that's, I think, behind my head over there. Okay, so I want to dive into a little bit of a regulatory picture. Maybe Sam, starting with you, because I think one thing everyone's sort of aware of is just there's been this unlocking in California of potential around accessory dwelling units, which is a market you're focusing on. Steve, I think also ADUs is on your agenda. Is that a replicable legislation in other states, or how are you viewing the opportunity of states actually allowing ADUs to fan out across cities?
Well, what California has done has been really, really impressive in that area by making it much easier to get ministerial approval. So you don't have to go through a whole public hearing. You don't have to go through a whole planning commission. As long as it meets the basic standards, you're going to get a stamp. And so they're really, really promoting speeding that up. We've had some other legislation that's been proposed but hasn't gone through on helping eliminate floor ratios and other things that can create problems when you're trying to put a unit, particularly on a smaller lot, because a lot of times you've got minimum backyard size or various things like that. And so by really taking the steps forward to ease the regulatory and approval process at the state level, it really promotes density in places where you're not going to have density otherwise. So it allows people to leverage their open space in the backyard to create that extra bedroom they need instead of having to move to Stockton, say, because that's the only place they can find land. So it's really opening things up, and I think there's a real opportunity. I don't know that you're necessarily going to see as much in many other parts of the country because they don't have the same issues of needing density without the ability to create density, because we still have a lot of areas that are prone to sprawl, are prone to expansion. But I think there's a real opportunity there, certainly.
Is the main blocker for people to actually want to build an ADU, is it purely this is difficult to pay for and finance, or in your guys' research, what is holding people back from adding an ADU? One
of the biggest challenges is local fees, actually.
Local fees.
Permitting and other fees, which can be quite onerous, up to 20+% of the build cost. But then it also varies greatly from community to community, because in places like Sonoma, they've gone head over heels to waive pretty much all those fees to really help further remove those barriers.
Gotcha. And then I'm curious what other regulatory hurdles you all face. If you could snap your fingers today, to sort of make things easier, or lobby Senator Wiener or a Board of Supervisor member in San Francisco. Is there, sort of things getting in the way of off-site construction scaling, whether it's building code amendments or what have you?
I'm not actually. For those of us in the modular business, it's actually easier. So this is kind of true across the nation. So modular buildings are treated the same as site-built buildings. There's no disclosure requirements. Communities can't discriminate against them. Banks can't discriminate, although they don't have to make the payouts that are required, at least for someone like us. But this isn't HUD code. This isn't manufactured, where banks and communities can and do discriminate. Different thing. So we have to comply with all local planning requirements, zoning, setback thing. When we go through the building permit, it's a bifurcated process. The state actually is responsible for reviewing your plans and signing off. They don't actually issue the permit, but they sign off on the plans, and inspections are done at the factory. And better, they actually, in California, outsource to third parties. So we use a group called Radco. They're a private company. We get our building plans approved typically in 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. That's not a typo. And they inspect at the factory. And the walls come sealed, all finished plumbing, electrical done, factory complete. We literally deliver to the local municipality a set of certificates signed by Radco or by the state that says, hey, this is inspected. And the local municipalities who are responsible both for the building permit, for the local work, as well as inspections locally, they have no ability or right to open up the walls and do inspections. So actually, that part's pretty good. So like in your scenario, what would I do to change at least modular housing? Actually, it's pretty good. Our issues are the same issues anyone has building. How long the process can take at a local level to get local approvals. The fact that it often is incredibly unpredictable. One planning review will give you one set of things, another set of things, one building inspector set of issues that you correct, another building inspector. There's just, the process is really inefficient. And one, at least for me, and I came out of tech, so, building, this was all kind of new to me. One vision of how it can be more efficient is exactly what I just detailed earlier. The state outsources to a number of third parties. I should have mentioned that. Radco is one of a number of third parties. So they have to fight for your business, which is to say it's private enterprise with capitalism doing what capitalism can often do well, create competition, create better service. It'd be great to see that with also the local permitting process. Maybe that also would be more efficient.
Rick, do you agree generally with that? Or
Yeah, generally, I'd echo. I think the one thing I find humorous is the one part of this business that's not that tough is what he was describing. And the irony is when I go get a permit and, I deliver 75% of the building done and slapped with a good housekeeping seal of approval on it, inspector goes, great. I pay the same inspection fee to the goddamn city of Oakland, and the guy only has to come out about 3 times instead of 14. So they love it.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't? You get the same amount of money, you do 25% of the work.
That's not always true in every city. I guess
I
it is
understand.
true in
Right.
Oakland.
I'm just saying, these guys are excited about it. It's
Right.
like, wow.
But given that, and thanks
Yeah.
for bringing up,
Yeah, yeah.
that does need to be fixed.
Right. We need to get a fee
Because
reduction.
there is less work, and some cities recognize that
Right.
and don't make you pay fees on that work,
Right.
which is appropriate.
Right.
One thing that's really driving a lot of growth and excitement in construction tech, prop tech, real estate tech is sort of the interest of the venture capital community. Can what you guys are building be like real venture businesses, or how are you approaching sort of the VC side of this business? Steve, you guys have some venture, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So did a Series A, and our seed funding was with the Obvious Ventures, which is based here. They're mission-driven. They focus on world positive investments, and they are a venture capital group. But interestingly enough, the group that led our Series A is a real estate-focused, very large private equity firm. Amazon participated in that, and there were a few others. Other than Obvious, we didn't have any of the traditional venture capital folks. We spoke to many, mostly up here, and there was a lot of interest. But we have some things that are just very unfamiliar with them. Let's start with construction. I mean, they're getting up to speed, but that's not an area historically where they've made a lot of investment. 2, our margins are way unusual. In construction, you're quite happy with 20-25% gross margin. We have some things we think we can get a little higher, but many VCs are used to that on a net side or even more. And like we're not getting 20%, 30% net margins. We're not some combination of that smart enough or maybe we're just sober about the realities here. But so that's a problem. And then third, a little bit, which came to play is like, so last year, by some measures, the new home construction market was about a $330 billion market. The top 10 folks, KB Home, Lennar, NVR, Pulte, those guys were like 26%. I mean, there's no Google, Facebook, Apple like domination. And again, VCs that's a little weird to them. Like, well, how are you going to really dominate? Well, we're not. I mean, but the nice thing about a $330 billion market is you literally can be a rounding error and be a multi-billion-dollar business. So all of us here can do very well, even though we compete on some levels. the market can support that. But again, it's a little weird for some of the VCs. But I think they'll get there, and hopefully people like us and others will show, hey, this is an interesting business. You can scale it. There is some technology innovation that can help. And I'm sure we'll see a lot more investment from the more traditional VCs in the future.
Great. I think, should we take some audience questions? No? Okay. I got more questions anyway.
I'd like to answer the VC
Yeah,
question,
yeah.
if that's okay. I mean, nothing against VC at all, but I think that putting factory building and VC together is a bad mix. I think that's part of why Zeta, which is a company I used, didn't make it. I've seen Gurdon, who's a real player, extract that capital out of this Northwest. And as a customer, things got worse. They're still a very viable and good company. And I think that finding people within the real estate world that understand the business and drawing the capital from in there rather from the venture capital world is the way I'm looking. And I think it gives us more breathing room. And it also creates some partnerships where we have built-in demand. So some of our investors, we have 10 people, and 8 of them are very accomplished development companies. So that's a built-in sort of pipeline.
Right, strategic investment.
Yeah, so I think that's how we're approaching it.
Sam, do you have a different opinion? Or?
Well, I mean, as mentioned, we came in a Y Combinator. So we're much more the traditional VC-backed tech company in that regard. And so we've gotten some great traction among some bigger VC firms. We've closed our seed. We're moving towards Series A. But we're also very much about developing the strategic partnerships that Rick mentioned. So for us, it's both. It's really how do we leverage the best of all these worlds to really maximize our impact. So leverage the unique nature of our technology to kind of bring in that tech side, leverage some of the concepts that we're exploring on the development side to bring in the developers and those strategic partners, and really kind of marry those two areas that don't necessarily overlap a lot, but really bring them together to leverage that expertise for maximum impact.
Okay. All right, I'll ask an audience question now on my screen. How does your thinking about innovation change when you consider the different needs of urban and rural communities? Does anybody have a thought on that? I guess sort of, like obviously geography and different types of communities like is going to play into how you all think about your product and your building.
I'd just say, I think, industrialized building, which is maybe what we're all sharing is a common theme, is that the ADU is obviously way more relevant to rural and urban communities, is one thing. The work we do is not terribly relevant to rural unless they want, we can do good 2- and 3-story buildings if that's something they would want. But traditional rural, I'm not sure we're terribly relevant.
Right. Am I right? The real sort of problem you're trying to address is mostly urban. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, just simply stated, right now we're focusing clearly on the greater Bay Area for the most part. I'm saying we're trying to build stuff close to transit stops. Buildings at transit stops, the BART line being the most notable, want to be 4 to 5 stories, which is our sweet spot where we can really beat site building substantially. So that's where we're going to at least focus the first 5 years.
Gotcha. I have a question. So we saw Google sort of make a presentation earlier about sort of energy efficiency in homes, and obviously they have a big investment in Nest. And for you guys, Steve, Amazon participated in your Series A, right? How much does sort of this smart home, connected home sort of play? Is that sort of the reason why we've seen sort of larger tech companies like Google and Amazon, maybe eventually Facebook, sort of get involved in housing in some way? Like, is there a data play here, I guess?
Well, there's certainly a data play. The adoption of smart speakers, which Amazon is the clear market leader, has been incredible. And we're really at an inflection point. We're seeing for the first time wide adoption, integration of smart home technology in just a great increasingly large number of homes in the U.S. Now, it's not coming. The approach isn't like what folks like the integrators were doing with one system that would control everything. It's coming through your smart thermostat, your smart speakers, smart lighting controls. With a way, either through Alexa or through Google, to control everything, so you don't have this one master pad that you had to buy from Crestron back in the day. But on the other hand, it's making this, as I said, much more accessible. And the Amazons and the Googles of the world it's a very large and very fast-growing market. It's extremely data-rich, and I think that's why they're so involved in it.
Sam, what are the features of, the home of the future that you think people want and need? Like how much of this work that you all are doing are just really trying to figure out how do we build this cheaper and build a product that people want to live in? Does sort of smart home technology play into that at all, or is that kind of just a distraction?
I would say it does, and a lot of it actually is like what the focus of the new project from Google he was talking about. How do we really help people save money? Because really at the bottom line is about making these homes more affordable for us. Like our real big focus is getting people into homes more affordably, making the cost of living there more affordable. So the opportunity of products like Nest and others to really help people understand their energy usage, understand their water usage, understand their environmental impact as well, because sustainability is a big part of that also. Because the more information you have and the better you're able to understand your habits and your usage patterns, the better able you are to make the adjustments to be having those impacts and those behavior patterns be what you want them to be, whether your goal is to save money, your goal is to save water. And so I think there's a real opportunity for the home of the future to integrate solar, to integrate all these different aspects and really allow people to live the life they want to live, whether that be the affordable life, a sustainable life, or a life of just having every single thing at their fingertips without having to leave the couch.
Right. I don't know if I want that, but okay. Okay, so we have the downturn question from the audience, which is good because I didn't really get to it. So what is so different in the current housing cycle we're in now that's different from the last cycle where efforts towards prefab construction didn't work? So for instance, do you think today will be sustainable from this point out, even if we run into a recession in the next 2 to 3 years? So how are you guys thinking about the cyclical nature of this industry that you all are in, and do you have a long enough pipeline, to get through it?
It's cyclical?
Yeah, I heard that somewhere.
Well.
Yeah, once you're good.
Well, so I'm not an expert at macro trends in housing or necessarily anything, but here's what I heard recently about what's happening now. We don't have the level of bad mortgages out there that you had in the last downturn, and B, there is not the glut of supply that we had last time. So most smart people that I've heard or spoken to about housing, of course, acknowledge there will be further downturns. But in the past, downturns tended to be more regional, not so national, not so long, and of course not so deep. So I think most of the smart people that I've heard from or talked to think that when it comes, similarly, it won't be as national, as deep, as long, but we'll see. So that's part of that. The prefab part. So there were a bunch of folks, I think the question, like, what's new about prefab? Well, nothing's new. Sears was doing prefab, almost 100 years ago. And those of us in California may not realize, but like modular homes is a huge part. 10% of New England's new homes are modular. I grew up in North Carolina. Modular manufactured homes are huge out there. So there are big chunks of the country, Pacific Northwest, where a large part of housing has been done for decades with prefab. What I think is new is that there are a group of companies who've been focused more on higher quality and more urban homes, and that started kind of with the Dwell Magazine had a competition 2004-05. Michelle Kaufman, Marmor Radziner, Living Homes, kind of from we started in 2006. We're focused on that, and like the case study architects and like Frank Lloyd Wright and Le Corbusier, we wanted to sell you a standard home like a Apple iPhone that you would just do with minimum modifications. But what we discovered is that our market, they wanted to build these homes in cities. And when you're building in cities, you're dealing with odd-sized lots and zoning requirements that vary. And so you got to customize. And so I think, what you heard earlier, Factory OS, certainly from us, we're working on a similar kind of software integration. We've just got to be good at customizing because that's what's happening in urban areas. So I think it's a combination of the urban market, at least, needing a better solution, off-site being able to provide that, frankly, partly just because we're building off-site, but also because I like to think we're also doing some smart things. And hopefully that will mean we, too, like the mobile home guys and the modular guys who have been around for decades, will last through the next recession, housing recession, and maybe even thrive because even at the bottom of the market, 2010, there was still $170 billion worth of new home construction. It's a fine market, and hopefully people will say, I'm going to go to a more reliable source for that for my projects when it happens, not if.
Sam.
We have what we consider 5 market segments. So when I do a presentation to somebody and we start, our first project was for supportive housing. California just passed $4 billion more. There's $1.2 billion in LA. There's a reservoir of capital and no production that's any good. So just meeting the supportive housing demand, and I see one of the questions about what's the possibility. We can do maybe 1,500 to 2,000 apartments a year on one shift. If we get into 2 shifts, we get to 3,000 to 4,000. If we add another building at Maryland, we'll get to 5,000. So when we're talking about 250,000 units are needed for supportive housing in LA, just as an example, you start there. Student housing is the second. Our project that's about to go online will be a student housing for UC Berkeley. Student housing in downturns, actually people go back to school, and student housing is a very big industry. Affordable housing, many of in this room know this, the tax credit program yields maybe 8,000 to 10,000 units per year in California, and it's been built through all the recessions I've seen. So you take that, you add employee housing, Google, Facebook, who want our work, that's another step. So the most volatile is the stuff I live in, and that's the least. That's going to be the least relied upon for my factory to succeed.
But won't, in a downturn, there won't be. Yes, there will still be a lot. There will still be construction going on, particularly in cities, perhaps, for housing. But the labor shortage won't be as intense. Won't developers just go with what's proven and they can get financed easily? I guess, how do you...
It's possible. I think your point's well taken. I think that, though, what happens in recessions, and this is a developer kvetching, is construction costs really don't come down that much. What happens is workers leave during the recession because there's not enough work. And they don't come back, actually, when the market returns. And that's partly why the labor spikes, the inflation spikes have been going. Bay Area is going at about 12% a year for the last 3 years. So it's twice what was quoted by Fannie Mae. So I don't think it's going to go down all that much with a recession. I mean, it'll flatten out. But if we're good and we're better and we're faster, better quality, all things we need to be, I think we'll be fine.
All right.
Yeah.
Sam?
So coming at that question from a slightly different angle, one of the other two hats I wear is sustainability. And with the IPCC report that just came out recently, looking at what we're staring down the barrel of coming in as soon as 2030, with even greater impacts by 2040, we're going to see more wildfires. We're going to see more floods. We're going to see a lot more of these weather and natural disasters that, frankly, are going to be wiping out large segments of housing stock. And so I think that's going to be a really fascinating thing to be watching, because I think modular and prefab And these new technologies really have an ability where traditional housing doesn't to help rebuild those communities in more resilient ways, faster, more cheaply, and really be a part of addressing and mitigating those impacts. And so as those impacts become more and more, I think it's going to be, yes, the economic recessions are going to be a big part of it, but there's going to be some real impacts that we're looking at that aren't necessarily being brought into the conversation as often.
That's so interesting. It's depressing that natural disaster is a potential, startup demand driver now, but that is the world we live in. Okay. One solution that some companies with a lot of capital have taken to really scale the potential supply is let's build in a place where we have a lot of freedom to just kind of experiment with a lot of new stuff. So, you've seen, obviously, Sidewalk Labs is trying to get a deal done in Toronto to build on in the Quayside waterfront neighborhood there, and they're talking about piloting cross-laminated timber buildings. I'm sure they'll also do some prefab. You've seen recently Katerra strike a deal in Saudi Arabia to build a lot of housing all at once, I think using, in part, a company they acquired out of India. Are you guys exploring those options at all? Is there just some land somewhere where we can just experiment with a bunch of our housing?
Also, Mare Island is something I just stumbled on, and for those who haven't been out there, it's an amazing piece of property. It's very, very large. It's a lot of vacant property, and it's basically been bought by some very, very dynamic entrepreneurs. And I've met with them, and they have a very utopian vision for the island. So not dissimilar to what Sidewalk wants to do in Toronto. So our factory's right there. So we're finding a natural marriage right there.
Interesting. Who's that group?
It's a wine entrepreneur coupled with a really interesting baker out of the Midwest. I've actually met with them in the last couple of days. They're fascinating people. And they've got control of what's called the North Island, and Lennar gave a letter of intent to sell the whole South Island. Lennar's my landlord.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Steve, is that tempting at all, or not really?
We're not in the development business currently. We're working with a bunch of developers. We're more focused on the urban market, infill. But sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. Sam, any thoughts?
Yeah, and we've had some great discussions with some communities around the Bay Area who are really interested in what we're doing and are excited to help set up some demo units, set up some locations on their property to help move this technology forward, to help create excitement among their community, to really help give them new tools to address their affordable housing crisis and housing shortages.
Gotcha. One thing that I wanted to go a little bit deeper on the union question. That just always seems to come up when I'm talking to people who are trying to understand this market. Is this going to be a barrier to scale? If they do try to build in cities that are bigger union towns, they're going to face political obstacles. Do you see that as a real threat, or is that overblown?
You have a thought of it? We've not had issues with unions. We don't do the site work. We're always site-based general contractors involved in doing that work. Some of them have union labor, some don't. We did a 8-unit project in the Presidio, have to pay prevailing wages. There were union guys on that job. No issues there. As this scales, it sounds like Factory OS has a deal with unions. People will clearly make deals that are appropriate, but it's not been an issue in the work we've done yet.
Okay. Rick?
Well, I think anybody who's read articles about us that the plumbers don't think we build a very good quality unit. It's been labeled prefab crap, which is very disappointing. But No, I don't mean to be that dismissive. I think that the camel's nose is under the tent. This problem's San Francisco. It costs $800,000 to build an affordable home using all union labor for 1,000 square feet. It's so unsustainable that I've had the entire San Francisco building department, planning department, probably 5 of the 9 supervisors out to the factory, and they've said, you know, we're going to try to build a stratified factory. And good on them, they may pull it off. But they said, we're not going to rely on that to solve our problem. So they're going to start ordering from us probably in the next year or so because they've got to save time and money.
Okay. So. What would be so if a typical affordable unit in San Francisco is $800,000, what is a factory OS unit?
Like I said, it's not a rough, well, what's 800, I can get to 400 today.
You think you can get it to 400? That's like in the wild, that's not in like a spreadsheet?
No. I mean, we're doing one in Oakland where I'm selling, a supportive home to a nonprofit for $66,000 per unit for the unit they're buying from us, and their site building costs will probably be $75,000. So they'd be at about $150, and they'd be at least $300 if they tried to do that unit site built.
Gotcha. Sam, what's the cost delta that you guys look at?
For an 800,000.
For whatever typical, because you're focusing on AD.
Yeah, we're looking at cutting costs by about 40%, 40 to 50%.
40, 50.
By leveraging technology, leveraging some of the other things we're doing. Yeah.
Steve, do you have a number you guys talk about?
I mean, we see, so again, we part of what we offer is you can come to us with your own architect based on plans you develop with him or her. And as long as they've either been developed in conformance with our design guidelines, which you can download at plantprefab.com, or you're willing to make some modifications, we can build for you. And so we often have clients, particularly developer clients, but end users too, who have bid out, who will get bids from us and local site GCs, and up here, 20 to 30% cheaper, like all in. But it's also funny. People often, of course, want to compare bid to bid. Like, we guarantee no change orders, unless you make them, but we don't make change orders. Site-based GCs, you will not find too many who guarantee no change orders. So comparing bids, actually, I'm just saying, is often not appropriate, because site GCs often do give you change orders, and often for good reasons, by the way, and sometimes for not good reasons. So anyway, that's what we find up here.
Gotcha. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I think we're out of time, and thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.